Our civilization is built on AC power, remote control, and radio waves for wireless communications. Imagine our lives without these technologies, without the internet and mobile telephones, and the connectedness that they have brought us. Looking back at the beginning of the 20th century, the technologies that shape our lives today were invented by one inspired man.
He pretty much single-handedly jump-started the second industrial revolution. He was called the inventor of the 20th century back then, when the 20th century started. And then all of a sudden, we all forgot about him, and he got like excluded from school books and everything,
My name is Nikola Tesla.
Tesla believed that electric energy should be considered the same as the air that we breathe, because in nature it is present in unlimited quantities.
Tesla's articles were published and republished by many magazines and newspapers. He was widely quoted, widely followed. He was here in New York, socially very well known. He was the ultimate gentleman in black tie, white tails. He was a great admirer of Sarah Bernhardt and other New York figures. He was known on the social scene. Tesla was a combination of a gentleman, a combination of society figure, a scientist, and a great engineer.
While during Tesla's life, he was one of the most famous people in the entire world. His fame for electricity overshadowed Thomas Edison's fame, I'm sure.
When all the newspapers were only writing about Nikola Tesla's new inventions and achievements, Edison began to execute animals on the streets of New York to show how dangerous Nikola Tesla's electricity was. Edison's hatred of Nikola Tesla and his electromagnetic motor got him to the point where Edison's company invented the electric chair.
If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration.
But his biggest project was to provide us with free wireless power transmission on Earth. The project was called Wardenclyffe Tower.
Istället daher den Antrag den Nobelpreis für Physik Nikola Tesla für die Entdeckung der Hochfrequenzströme und des elektromagnetischen Drehfeldes zu verleihen. Zwei physikalische Leistungen, die der Menschheit zum allergrößten Nutzen gereicht haben. He is enigmatic, he's mysterious, his ideas are mysterious, and that of course also perhaps made the committee that is more traditional in its view of scientific problems and so on, that they thought interesting, but let's wait and see. But his vision for the system of communication is, for example, exactly what we are doing.
Nikola Tesla was given this strange diagnosis by many writers. I disagree with them. As a psychologist, I get to see a lot of people with obsessive compulsive disorder. Nikola Tesla, for example, I would say, was a creative. He was somebody who could get so involved in all of his projects that he would be consumed totally. And whenever a creative person is creating, they're creating something totally new, something totally different. It's an escape. It's not the reality we know. When he talked about you might be able to carry this instrument in your pocket or your hands and you could see a loved one from way across the world and talk to them at the same time and put it in your back pocket. People at that time, they weren't ready for his kind of genius. This was a man who was known to speak over 6 languages. This was a man who was very well read. You need a certain kind of divergent thinking in order for you to be able to think outside the box.
In the year 1900, he forecast that you and I would have a cell phone. In 1900, he knew that you could wirelessly communicate, and he knew that at some point, not only would you wirelessly be able to communicate voice, but you'd wirelessly be able to communicate pictures. He saw all of that going into the future.
In his patent, A Method of Signaling and System of Signaling, he describes in 1900 how messages of information should be wirelessly transferred with radio waves. But that electric waves would not be electromagnetic as Hertz waves. His observation and work was to make the transmission of information highly private, that messages could not be interfered with, intercepted, or disturbed in any way, which is not the case with Hertzian waves.
Transmission of electricity by wirelessly is theoretically possible. There are all kinds of practical issues with it. There are political issues with it. You know, we already have people who are very concerned about the electromagnetics given off by cell phones.
The wavelengths of the Tesla frequencies are extremely long, so there's no way that your body can get any electromagnetism out of it. It's just the electrostatic. The electrostatic is very closely related to the orgone or the life force.
Nazivao ih je nehercijanski da bi stavio ljudima do znanja da ne radi sa talasima običnim elektromagnetnim preko koji mi slušamo radio, gledamo televiziju, pričamo preko mobilnog telefona, znači elektromagnetnim talasima.
Tesla's frequencies, as they behave in a different manner. They actually have been found to be beneficial and were used for medical purposes for quite some time. That's how Tesla continued to make money after the Wardenclyffe dive, because he worked for these electrotherapeutic companies like Fisher that made all of these Tesla transmitters, and then they would apply the frequencies to the body, and they were found to be beneficial because they're a different type of frequency.
I mean, they had nothing to work with hardly. You know, they had some wire and silk wrap and some wooden blocks and some brass screws, and they built this whole theory and proved everything with virtually nothing. Now, what kind of intellect can do that? There's nobody on the planet today that could do that. Out of 6 billion people, there isn't one.
He didn't sleep much. He didn't need to sleep because he was nurtured by the prana, by life energy, by frequency. And that's what he was all about. He was all about frequency.
Everything in our reality has its own frequency. As we know, we can see between 440 and 770 terahertz. We hear between 20 and 20,000 hertz. Our heart beats at a frequency of 1 to 1.67 hertz, and our brain functions at a frequency between 0.5 and 30 hertz. The higher the frequency of the brain, the more alert or stressed we are. Now, Earth also has its own frequency, and it is the same as our brain when it is in a state of telepathic possibilities or state of global awareness. It is 7.83 hertz.
The gift of mental power comes from God, divine being. And if we concentrate our minds on that truth, we become in tune with this great power.
Nikola Tesla's father was an Orthodox priest, and the same fate was waiting for young Tesla. However, his mother inspired him to invent. She came from an inventor's family and was an inventor herself. From an early age, she played memory and telepathic games with her children. And that is how she encouraged a special kind of thinking in them. At a very young age, he constructed a water turbine. He was fascinated by a description of Niagara Falls that he found in books. In his imagination, he pictured a big wheel powered by the falls. 30 years later, his childhood dream would come true.
On je shvatio da on može sam vladati svojom sviješću. To znači da se sam može reći što želi, a što ne želi. Raditi, stvoriti, misliti i osjećati. I to prenijeti onda na djelo. I on je rekao, to nije bilo jednostavno. To je bila svakodnevna borba. To je bila borba da misli ne vladaju njim, da osjećaj ne vladaju njim, nego da on vlada osjećajima, da on vlada mislima i da on određuje svoj dan.
All of his inventions would come, he said, would come with a flash of light in his head and a big migraine, and then he would see the device, like he was able to visualize the device that came with this flash of light in such detail that he didn't need to make a blueprint to build it.
And he'd see the schematic, and that's all he'd see. He couldn't see people, he couldn't see anything else until that went away. But it was frozen in his mind long enough for once it went away, he could sit down and draw it out, all the detailed dimensions, everything. It was really weird, but in his way, he used it as a tool.
His thought, his thinking, his genius rose above his origin and the tiny little village in which he was born and the country in which we were born, a country that I would say is an unhappy place historically.
I am equally proud of my Serbian origin and Croatian homeland.
He invented radio-controlled robots so that people wouldn't have to go to war anymore. They could just send the machines to fight each other. But that didn't work, But he was not naive about the problems of human nature and what humanity as a group has to go through to, emerge at this higher level of maturity.
His big dream was that planet Earth will be endless source of energy and we will not need any gas, oil, any corporations, any wars, and all the bullshit.
So in his vision, it would be, a society that's not driven by material gain. It would be a society that's driven by connecting mankind to the highest possible level.
But I think the kind of ideal world he have, we are not ready for it. We have to change consciousness. It's all about how the human can change his consciousness. By changing consciousness, we can change the rest of the world, but our own consciousness.
Because consciousness is not something you're manufacturing in your brain. Consciousness is your brain and your whole body acting as an antenna, tapping into this field of information. And I think Tesla knew this, and he was very, very protective of that field so that he could download incredible information and apply it to technologies.
I think a lot of this personality of Tesla that he tells the press that he's counting his silverware, he's polishing this, he doesn't want to shake hands, he doesn't like pearls, things of that nature. And I thought, this is his way of fooling the press a little bit.
You become aware that you're bathing in this field of information, and you become better at controlling it and extracting information from it. You become more sensitive to what's around you, the people that are around you, what they're thinking, how they influence the field. And that's why he didn't like to shake hands with people. He was very aware of any energies that were not of the highest. When he was trying to concentrate and download information, he didn't necessarily want somebody around him that was kind of messing up the field.
That's also the reason why he probably didn't want to get involved with a woman ever, because he could see the patterns of that into the future. Like, he could see what it would entail for him to have a relationship with any kind of intimate relationship with a person, how much it would take away from inventing all the stuff that we now take for granted.
Castrate himself not to have sex, that he will cost all this energy he will dedicate to science. I think when you are in such a degree genius, solitude is something that you have to deal with all your life.
My brain is only a receiver. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. I have not penetrated into the secrets of this core, but I know that it exists.
Yeah, basically, he was the first one to come up with a workable radio system.
Radio, as he originally conceived it, was probably very similar to what we do now, but he realized very quickly that it's extremely inefficient. And you have to understand that Tesla's focus was totally on efficiency of the energy economics of the system. His electrodes were actually virtual antenna that was strictly for the storage of charge on a temporary basis. The actual signal was sent into the Earth.
He discovered that the Earth is a conductor of unlimited dimensions, like a vast reservoir, and behaves like an ocean when disturbed. No matter how much along its axis the Earth is disturbed with electric waves, it always keeps the same natural frequency.
V Colorado Springs je pol naredil še en eksperiment, s katerim je na razdaljo 27 mil od svoje testne postaje poslal približno 50 kW električne moči, za katero je prižgal ne vem koliko žarnic, brez žic. In s tem je praktično dokazal, da je njegova teorija pravilna in da je tudi izvedljiva v praksi.
He discovered the natural frequency of the Earth. And not only that, he also discovered that the frequency that the Earth harmonizes with is an odd number.
If you only knew the magnificence of the 3, 6, and 9, then you would have a key to the universe.
Attention, you are in ether.
In Tesla's time of discovering radio wave transmission, it was believed that they were traveling through ether.
All the way up to 1905, there's an energetic ether or an energetic substrate. It's absent for 25 years from 1905 to 1930, where the belief of the scientific community was it's empty. From 1930 on, when quantum electrodynamics became accepted, it came back as a far more energetic model. So it's ironic that our beliefs today are dominated from such a small little window of history.
And
A lot of people look at empty space and they think it's actually empty when it's filled with infinite potential.
He also wrote a formula for human energy that is the mass squared of velocity. He said velocity is a force governing everything in nature. If we look to Einstein's famous formula of relativity, it is the same, just that Einstein defined velocity as the speed of light instead of ether. He discovered that the discharged electricity of lightning and Earth travel from one side of the Earth to another at a speed of 471,240 kilometers per second. That is how he proved that the speed of light was not the ultimate speed in our reality.
What we have not yet managed to do is to unite gravity, which is the classical theory still, the classical theory of Einstein, and the quantum physical description of our other interactions. The basic question is, can we find one law which contains all the different interactions in nature in one single expression?
Tesla je de facto rešio problem građe materije, ali nije pobedio njegov put u fizici. Ova fizika koja je išla za moći, dakle, pre svega za atomskim oružjem, ta fizika je povukla i univerzitetsku nauku i institute i zapravo mi danas imamo jednu fiziku bez pravog uvida u suštinu materije, zato što nemamo filozofiju koja se time bavi.
In 1900, he describes the importance of producing electrical power from renewable energy sources. He also described a wireless power transmission and transfer through a natural medium, Earth.
Every year, the level of temperatures on our planet are rising because of the enormous usage of fossil fuels and coal. But if we would listen to Nikola Tesla and his plan for our future, we would not deal with climate changes now.
I believe that mankind has looked at climate change in that same way, as if it were a fiction, as if pretending that climate change wasn't real would somehow make it go away. But I think we all know better than that now. Every week, we're seeing new and undeniable climate events, evidence that accelerated climate change is here right now. Droughts are intensifying, our oceans are acidifying, with methane plumes rising up from the ocean floor. We are seeing extreme weather events and the West Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets melting at unprecedented rates, decades ahead of scientific projections. The time to answer humankind's greatest challenge is now.
There are about 7 billion people in the world. And so now not only do we have to find energy for people, but we have to do it in such a way so that it will not continue adding carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases.
Na področju električnih pogonov nas vse čaka še ogromno dela. Tukaj bo še veliko razvoja. Veste, mi se ne smemo omejevati s tem, da so baterije tiste, ki danes omejujejo električne pogone. Jaz sem prepričan, da so ovire dejansko samo v glavah. Jutri bomo lahko energijo ali selili brežično, ali bomo jo proizvajali med letom.
What's incredible to me is that his name is now, a brand of a car. And that's how the majority of people know him.
So that was Martin Eberhard's idea. He was a fan of Nikola Tesla, particularly because Nikola Tesla invented the three-phase motor and three-phase electricity. And all of these motors that we use to drive these vehicles are three-phase motors. And it's one of those things that, you know, it seems it's obviously a very good idea after somebody's thought of it, but somebody had to think of it first, and that was Nikola Tesla.
Tesla was studying 3 years in Graz. In the first 2 years, he was very successful. He was really good in mathematics and physics.
But one day, a new invention of that time came from Paris. It was Graham's dynamo. While Professor Pöschl was making demonstrations, the brushes caused a problem, sparking badly. Tesla commented that it might be possible to operate a motor without these appliances. Professor Pöschl remarked that Mr. Tesla might accomplish great things, but that he would certainly never achieve that. It would be the equivalent of converting a steadily pulling force, like that of gravity, into a rotary effort. It is a perpetual motion scheme, an impossible idea. Being humiliated in front of the whole class made Tesla shift his thinking to accept the challenge and prove that the impossible was possible. He left the university. He needed money. That is why he went to an industrial town, Maribor, where Nikola Tesla met Karl Scherbaum, who was trying to construct a little power station to produce electricity out of his bakery. Tesla got involved with this project. After he shared his ideas about the dynamo improvement and how to connect it to a steam mill, the police arrested him. The official police report from the 24th of March, 1879 says Nikola Tesla had to be escorted by police guard to his hometown Gospic. The reason? No money, no job, and no vision for the future. Only he knew that he was close to an invention that could change the whole world, but no one believed him anymore.
Energy of a single thought may determine the motion of a universe.
To fulfill the last wish of his father, he went to Prague and signed up for philosophical studies at the Charles University. In Prague, he spent most of the time in the Clementinum Library. Earth's magnetic field makes the moon rotate around our planet. The sun makes the Earth and moon rotate by its strong magnetic field around the sun. But how to imitate that magnetic field from the cosmos into the rotation of a motor? In Budapest, he was focusing so much on his invention that he got sensitive to any vibration. The whistle of a locomotive 30 miles away made vibrations so strong that the pain in his body was unbearable. The ground under his feet trembled continuously. And then, one day, his motor appeared in his mind. In 1884, Nikola Tesla arrives in America.
Tesla, who came on his own volition with essentially no family or no money available to him, only a letter of credit from the Edison functions in Paris.
Edison gives him a job, but is not interested in Tesla's electromagnetic motor invention. He is there to improve Edison direct current motors. Edison promises him $50,000 for that.
And Edison had all these problems with these big DC systems because they are creating these massive magnetic fields. I mean, just massive. You know, you're running DC current down, you know, from one end of Manhattan to the other through cables. I mean, cables this big. Thousands of amps at just 100 volts because Edison didn't like voltage. You know? So he worked at everything at 100 volts, which is, from an engineering standpoint, is brain dead. But, you know, he was convinced 100 volts wouldn't kill anybody.
Tesla makes 24 new designs for him, but the payment turns out to be just a joke. Tesla answered Edison's joke by patenting all the improvements he did for Edison, so that Edison could not legally use Tesla's unpaid work. This sets off a rivalry between Tesla and Edison. The climax of their competition was when Nikola Tesla, together with Westinghouse, signed a contract to light up Chicago.
The age of electricity had arrived.
Chicago was the first city in the world lit by electric power, and it was Nikola Tesla's invention of an electromagnetic motor that produced AC power. That was a truly historical moment and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. 27 million visitors from 46 countries from all around the world came to see the exhibition. Tesla proved that he was the most important inventor in the world, and that the impossible was possible if you followed your dreams and instinct. The world at once knew the name Nikola Tesla.
Tesla's first connection was to connect Niagara Falls, the electric energy from Niagara Falls, to the electric grid. Thomas Edison was still relying on coal.
Tesla achieved replacing all the coal, individual coal-fired plants that were in people's factories that were sickening and poisoning everybody around them into electric motors and cleaned the whole thing up.
But the ultimate goal was to take from a source that was basically free. Of course, then the power from Niagara Falls was transmitted via polyphase power system to cities like Buffalo and New York City.
He developed 40 inventions for producing and distributing electric energy. In all this time, changes were only made in the development of materials. His invention of the AC power system are still being used today and have remained unchanged.
U svakom slučaju imao je uvide u najdublju realnost, pre svega zato što je mnogo voleo prirod, on je posmatrao šta se dešava u prirodi, gledao je prirodne pojave, da li je to sunčev sistem, da li je to rast drveća, da li je to potok. Uglavnom, on je imitirao prirodu i trudio se da principe koje ona koristi prenese u svoje uređaje i sisteme i zato je imao tako velikog uspeha.
Tesla was the father of renewable energy because hydroelectric power is renewable. The water evaporates, it comes down as rain, fills the lakes, because those sources do not provide CO2 into the atmosphere, and they do not therefore create a climate change problem.
The electric cars have been around for a very long time. In the early 1900s, there were quite a few electric cars. For a while there, they were more popular than gasoline cars because you didn't have to start them with a crank handle. But the batteries, of course, weren't great. So the big thing that's changed to now is that we've got vastly better batteries, and of course, we've got all the electronics and software to control the motors. So electric cars actually predated gasoline cars. Part of the vision of the Tesla founders was to change the public perception of electric cars. And I think that Tesla Motors has succeeded enormously well at doing that. First, you have to remember this was 2003. So that's the year that the California mandate for zero-emission vehicles got repealed. And you couldn't buy an electric car. All of the ones that had been on the market, like the General Motors EV1, were taken off the market. And the EV1s were actually taken back by General Motors and crushed. Well, the only reason that people didn't all drive electric cars was because, well, you couldn't buy one. So we managed to make one. There's a great tendency for people to think that electric cars are zero emission. Well, they're zero emission at the car, but if you plug them into the grid, then they're getting electricity from the national grid. And a lot of that is still coal. So in the US, that's about 40%. In Australia, it's 69%. In China, it's over 90% coal. So it depends where you are. But in most countries in the world, if you plug an electric car into the grid, you're burning coal.
What if an alternative system already exists? One that could charge our telephones, computers, and electric cars wirelessly.
Glejte, sej energijo že danes brežično prenašamo. Sej zato, da pride signal do telefona in gre nazaj, to je energija, ki se prenaša brežično po zraku. Problem je samo seveda jakost te energije oziroma moč. In jaz sem prepričan, da obstajajo sistemi in bodo jutri dosegljivi vsem.
Tesla intended for this place to be what he called his radio city. He intended it to be a place of communication system and an energy generating facility.
In 1901, he began to build his Wardenclyffe Tower as a magnifying transmitter.
He was trying to build a huge Tesla coil that would, electrify the ionosphere and enable free power for everybody that has an antenna.
He would imitate lightning and reflect them to the Earth. The electric charge that would accumulate in the globe of the tower would then be transmitted in pulses through the Earth. Like that, energy and information would be transmitted instantly to every point on Earth into a small device. It is this patent that our mobile telephones as well as Wi-Fi devices were developed from. But how would we use that? We would stick a device, like a Wi-Fi modem, directly with the wire into the ground in front of our house. This would receive power and information from the Earth and at the same time distribute it further through the air to devices that need electric energy to work. Each device would then have a small receiver the size of a watch that would be placed into the product, like receivers of Wi-Fi transmission today in computers, which detect these signals. Our mobiles would work the same way, just that the signal would be covered everywhere you go and not changed by bad weather. In addition, we would not need to charge them or anything else anymore. Tesla envisioned that we would power not only houses, but cars, trains, and airplanes too. It would not be necessary to dig into the Earth for fossil fuels or coal anymore. We would use the Earth and ionizing air to do what nature naturally uses it to do.
Tesla je zelo dobro poznal prednosti električne energije in veliko stvari na tem področju naredil, vendar je bil pred časom, da so ga enostavno ustavili. Jaz sem prepričan, da je bil on ustavljen, vendar prej ali slej bo človeštvo prišlo po drugačnih poteh tudi do njegovih spoznanj in bomo lahko uporabili to, kar bi lahko uporabljali že stoletja.
The tower was almost completely finished, but Tesla was left without money.
J.P. Morgan was one of the main financial backers for Tesla with this project. There came a point when Guglielmo Marconi sent a transatlantic message, made a big splash with what he was able to do. Meanwhile, he had been using Tesla's patents and Tesla's work to be able to do that. What Morgan had supported here was the idea that Tesla would be able to send that kind of communication. So once Marconi did it, Morgan no longer had any use for what Tesla was doing. It had already been done by someone else. And so his interest in supporting the continued work here was no longer part of his plan. Tesla went to him and said, well, I have greater plans than just sending a transatlantic message. I want to create an opportunity for people to have unlimited amounts of energy transported.
J.P. Morgan said, nobody's pulling up to my gas pump and getting the gas for free. And Nicholas Tesla wanted to give it to the world for free for the betterment of mankind.
For our existence and comfort, we require heat, light, and mechanical power. How do we now get all these things? We get them from fuel. We get them by consuming material. What will man do when the forests disappear, when the coal fields are exhausted?
They literally turned off the public's mind. They manipulated the public's mind. They hypnotized them into a sleep and forgetfulness. You know, the media was new and fresh then, and they realized that they could really manipulate whole populations with it. And that's what they did with Nikola Tesla. They took the new form, the new mediums, they bought up all the newspapers, and they used it to put the public to sleep about this.
Tesla's work holds the mark of genius, and he has been a pioneer in vast fields of electrotechnology. However, his contributions lie too far back in time, 40 years, to be considered for a Nobel Prize award. Interesting is that the Nobel Committee really states that Tesla's work holds the mark of genius.
Was that really the reason why Tesla did not get the Nobel Prize in 1937? Because his inventions were too old? Or was there something else that happened before that prevented him from getting the Nobel Prize? In 1909, the Nobel Prize in Physics was given to Guglielmo Marconi for recognition to contributions of the development of wireless telegraphy.
They underlined that Tesla had made the most crucial improvements. Since we have known that Marconi got the prize, you can't go back. If you have made a decision, it might be totally wrong.
He would never be granted a patent because Tesla already had the patents granted in his name. But after he became associated with J.P. Morgan, magically the patents were granted. So, you know, money has a lot to say about how these things get done.
The last years of Tesla's life were mostly spent in court, defending his patents and inventions. Marconi's company was selling licenses for radio transmission in the US and getting big fees for using radio transmission. But when they also wanted to get paid from the US government for their contribution of using radio communication in World War I, the trial started. There were enormous financial interests behind this trial.
And all that information was then used to form the RCA Corporation, which became a very big moneymaker for the establishment.
And at that time, that's when they started to attack his reputation, try to make him look like a kook and a crank in the press. By the early 40s, he had been nearly forgotten.
For many years, Nikola Tesla lived in the Waldorf Astoria, and over that time, John Jacob Astor and he were friends. Once Astor died in the Titanic, the property at the Waldorf was owned by another man. His name was George Bolt. And not long after that, Mr. Bolt died. And over those years, Tesla wasn't paying his rent. He was living there on credit. And once those two gentlemen died, Bolt's heirs decided they wanted to have Tesla pay what he owed them. And he didn't have the money. So the heirs to George Bolt brought him to court. In 1915, he lost ownership of the property, and it was taken over by those people he owed a debt to, primarily the heirs to the Waldorf Astoria.
They did everything in their power to discredit him. So he would never be able to achieve that he would never be able to get funding from somebody else to achieve like free energy, which I think was like one of the biggest crimes against humanity that ever happened, you know?
I don't care that they stole my idea. I care that they don't have any of their own.
It is time to learn the truth about wireless power transmission, which once existed on Earth, not only as an idea, but as a functional system, from which we still use today's systems of communication.
We started putting the pieces together and started doing experimentation where we actually had duplicated some of his work. And especially with his power claims that he could generate massive amounts of electricity for small amounts of horsepower, which means I don't have to burn coal and oil in great big mountains to get my electricity. We could take power out, get 50 watts in, take that same power we use, send it back through the transformer and cancel out the input power and measure 1 watt at the transformer and 50 watts in the pole.
Lightspeed is a powertrain company. We make powertrains, not vehicles, all the stuff that makes them go. And they're electric powertrains for heavy-duty vehicles. The big difference, though, with this is that it's got an onboard generator called a range extender that can burn fuel on board and make electricity to keep the battery charged, so you can keep driving forever.
Hyperloop is often called the fifth mode of transportation. Imagine a capsule and moving basically just below the speed of sound. So the capsule levitates through a passive magnetic levitation technology called IndoTrack. The whole system is powered by alternative energy. So you have solar panels along the track, so using the same right-of-way. And we're using wind, kinetic energy through regenerative braking, and depending on the climate, even geothermal, to potentially produce more energy than we're actually using. We realized very early on that in order to make Hyperloop happen, we needed to build more than just a company. We needed to build a movement. I think that if you have a single person like Nikola Tesla who has great ideas, great capabilities, and what it really takes then to move it forward is to find other people passionate about the same thing that help him to elevate things. It's always good to have a genius and also understand how to get something to the market.
And apparently Swamiji and Tesla got along very well. Tesla was very impressed with him, and Swamiji also, in Tesla's writing, he always used these Sanskrit terms. Akasha can be translated as ether, basic building blocks of nature. So even before creation, this ether will exist. And Swamiji thought that he could mathematically prove the equivalency, so that matter and energy were not two different things. And Swamiji felt that if Tesla could do this, this would give a mathematical proof to this idea that was accepted thousands of years ago in India.
Our main goal is to understand better what was the evolution of the laws of nature in the very early moments of the universe, just after the Big Bang. We have now approached that initial moment to about 1 trillionth of a second. I mean, we don't know what caused the Big Bang, and we don't know what kind of energy was available because we have no way of going beyond the Big Bang. You know? So I guess that's a metaphysical question.
The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence.
To understand the Wardenclyffe project, do we need a small shift in our understanding?
Boy, nobody ever asked the question, what did he do with a Tesla coil? He had ways where he could take that high voltage and oscillate it at the right frequencies where he could trick electrons in a way to where they opened what we call the ether valve. Some of the experiments He would go to the far end of Long Island in the darkest part he could get away from lights. And then he'd hook up this small high voltage Tesla coil type system he had. And what it would do, it would take the layers of nitrogen in the atmosphere right along that wire, and it would ionize. And he would strip the electrons off that layer of gas. And then all of a sudden, he would light up acres and acres and acres of forest. And every air molecule was emitting light.
Our consciousness is not in the brain. That's mechanical. Consciousness is connected to all consciousnesses. They're all connected together. And the computer, if you will, to which our consciousness is connected is the brain.
With the Wardenclyffe Tower, he would increase the natural potential of the Earth. But that would also increase our consciousness.
In 1917, on the 4th of July, they set dynamite to the statue. They hoped to be able to get some money back on what Tesla owed them by selling the tower for scrap.
Edison started to build his motion picture empire, connecting all the people in the U.S. that had inventions in motion pictures under a corporation called the Motion Pictures Patent Company, known also as the Edison Trust. The Edison Trust would issue licenses to all the producers or distributors who dared to deal in motion pictures. But there were independent producers that pirated films and equipment from Europe and were secretly shooting films in the U.S. without Edison's approval. Even Charlie Chaplin was a star in Europe through the pirated films brought by these producers to Europe, while in the U.S. he could not be seen on screen because of the Edison Trust license. The Edison Trust was made to have control over what is produced and distributed in motion pictures in the U.S. Edison had to be sure that nothing about Tesla would come to the big screen.
Edison onda postaje baš simbol Amerike u mnogo većem meri nego što je bio ranije. I ranije on bio poznat, ali baš 1920-ih, i to je neka vrsta ranog korišćenja PR, public relations. I tada Tesla nekako biva guran u drugi plan.
Independent producers were fighting with Edison, and to get far away from Edison, they began to build a motion picture town, Hollywood, a place where there was a lot of natural light, and they did not need his Black Maria studio or his approval to make movies. Finally, after a federal court decision in 1915, the monopoly of Edison Trust was dismissed as an unnecessary protection of patents.
Nema nijedan kadar filmski Tesla kako to je apsolutno nemoguće, da nije nikad snimljen. Takođe nema ni glasa, nema ni tona. Iako mi znamo da je Edison bio taj koji je prvi proizveo fonogram.
At the same time that Nikola Tesla lost his property Wardenclyffe, Edison lost his Edison Trust. In May 1915, Edison wrote in the New York Times, "The government should maintain a great research laboratory where it could be developed all the technique of military and naval progression without any vast expense." The U.S. Congress allocated $1.5 million for its implementation. Edison agreed to serve as the head of the Naval Consulting Board. A Navy laboratory was set up to experiment with wireless technology and continue Nikola Tesla's work. With Wardenclyffe, Nikola Tesla had described the idea of internet and emails, electric newspapers, and social media. It was the U.S. Navy laboratory that, in the end, paved the way for the internet. John Edgar Hoover, who is credited with establishing the FBI in 1935, was personally following Nikola Tesla. That is why Tesla, for the last decades of his life, never walked alone and was always watched by the secret police.
basically feeding pigeons in the park till the day he died. And he's one of the brightest guys on earth. So I can't even imagine how frustrating that must have been. People just didn't listen to him anymore. I didn't take him seriously.
It is absurd that the man who invented radio and wireless communication was in the end the only one using the old way of communicating, via pigeons. They were the only way for him to communicate with the rest of the city without John Edgar Hoover and the FBI knowing about it.
I met him myself. He hugged me and kissed me like any good Serb could do. And he understood in me that I represented him as the younger person, because he had an older brother who died. I had an older brother who died, both accidentally. And he saw in me a little bit of himself as I was approaching his age.
He cared about people. You know, everything was from a humanitarian standpoint. And to take a guy like that and then have to put him in the mix of industrialists and capitalists and, you know, the greed and fear and the money game and all that, how he survived all that is amazing, you know, and he kept his integrity to his last breath.
He should have been a billionaire, but he died alone and penniless in a New York hotel room on Orthodox Christmas in New York City in 1943. The U.S. Supreme Court finally decided that Tesla was the rightful owner for the patents for wireless communication after his death, despite Marconi being awarded a Nobel Prize for this.
He was forgotten for a while in the 50s and 60s. Now we have a resurgence of interest in Tesla. There was a rock band called Tesla here in the United States. And of course, the selection by Elon Musk of the name Tesla for his automobile was I think, tremendous boost to Tesla's legacy. It caused a lot of people to wonder, well, who is this Tesla?
The idea of Tesla is not one that many Americans grew up with. It's sometimes hard for teachers to understand even why or what. In the morning, our students say the Inventor's Pledge, and so it is a pledge to themselves as well as to the school community. It says, last night I was a dreamer, and today I'm an inventor. If I can dream it, I can imagine it, and if I can imagine it, I can create it.
Nothing better than one man change the whole world. What better we can ask for?
The interest in Tesla today is people talk about the mythology so much, they talk about Tesla. Nobody's really been trying to understand what he was talking about and what he did. Humanity needs this stuff, and we can't let this stuff die.
Tesla's favorite machine was what he called the self-acting engine, and it is a machine that takes the heat of the ambient air and it allows us to harness solar energy at any place on the planet 24/7.
The good news is that renewable energy is not only achievable, but good economic policy. This is not a partisan debate, it is a human one. Clean air and a livable climate are inalienable human rights. And solving this crisis is not a question of politics, it is a question of our own survival.
In the end, it was not only Tesla that was repressed, but us, all of civilization. He did his job. He gave us all what he was living and working for, and we are using almost all of his inventions today, but not for free, as he wanted us to. He said that the world was not ready for his invention. It was too far ahead of its time. But he also said that the same laws would prevail in the end and make it a triumphal success.
And it has to be about his science. Otherwise, his day is done. We're never going to get another genius like that ever again. So we have to pick up where he left off. And it's going to take a whole bunch of minds to do what this one mind did.
Let the future tell the truth and evaluate each one according to his work and accomplishments. The present is theirs. The future, for which I have really worked, is mine. My name is Nikola Tesla.